Thank you very much. I think this is the first time in my life I've ever given a series of lectures where I've been introduced and so glowingly with each lecture, and I do appreciate it. But I wonder if all these wonderful gentlemen could spend their time better doing something else. But anyway, thank you very much for that introduction. The numbers are down, and there are various theories being thrown up to account for this. One of these is I'm simply a terrible lecturer, and the word is getting out. This has been rejected out of hand. The second explanation that that this young gentleman favors is that I made the mistake last time of having some equations on the board. I won't make that mistake again. Oh, but actually I will. There's one slide that has some. This is a contender. It's a possible contender. And the third explanation is we changed the time. Yeah. And that's the most benign explanation. There's no fault, applied. So I'm going to favor that explanation as we proceed. So there we are. And there's the email again. Still haven't heard from any of you. But I gave a seminar at the UP yesterday afternoon, and the students did send me emails. So I'm always hopeful that some of you will respond. So this time we're doing industrialization, and again in a comparative way, so that we can have a metric in assessing Philippine performance with the rest with whom you compete. And furthermore, I think this is the first lecture that begins to creep up into the 70s, when some of you were already alive, so this is good. This is good, getting a little more modern, and on Tuesday next, it's going to be a lot of demographic issues and its impact on out-migration and other issues, capital flows and growth performance here in Asia in particular, and then I will bring it up to the year 2000. So, be patient with me. And on Thursday, is this going to do this the whole time? On Thursday, I promise you I'll bring you up to 2011. So there we are. Okay. As usual, do the American thing. You have to advertise. So this lecture is based on a lot of wonderful publications of mine. There's one that looked at 18th and 19th century India, the classic example of de-industrialization. The literature is, the library sags, with volumes on this issue, and the conclusion in that literature is always, Britain did it. Lancashire, Industrial Revolution, sent all those textiles to India and wiped out the cottage industries, and then Karl Marx could write Das Kapital and talk about the bones of the weavers bleaching on the plains of Madras, so blah, blah, blah. It's all wrong, as it turns out. The fault lay within, not without. So that was one prime example to look at. That is, before we look at industrialization, we have to look at de-industrialization. Mexican experience is interesting because your neighbor on the galleon trade resists, I think, better than any other country in Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, these de-industrialization forces, and therefore it invites the question, what was it about domestic culture, institutions, policy, etc., that would explain they're doing better. So you're going to see, I'm going to spend some time using Mexico as an example because it is exceptional in that dimension. It still suffers de-industrialization, but not as bad. And we want to know why this is so. And there's another example. The Ottomans go through de-industrialization as well. And then there's this wonderful book I'm trying to sell you that I talked about in the first lecture that also dwells on it. And then finally, there's this NBR working paper, which you can go to NBR and download or ask me for, and I'll be happy to send it to you. So anyway, I showed you this before, but maybe those in the room weren't here in the first lecture. Maybe you were and you forgot. So here it is again. It looks at the long view on industrialization performance, 2 centuries, starting with 1750. And you get the performance of this industrial indicator for the European core. That's going to be basically Germany, France, Holland, the UK, and so on, the leaders of the pack. And then the Asian and Latin American periphery. And then the 2 combined, the ratio of one to the other. So it starts off, if you look at the bottom ratio of core to periphery, you see this widening gap. That is the relative industrial content of the first industrializers dominates more and more over time. But look at the timing of it. The differences between the two in 1750 are trivial. They're almost on parity, 1 to 1, you know. And by 1800, you know, there is the starting of industrial revolutionary forces, but it's still in European core, but it's still not much that separates China, India, and England in terms of the amount of industrial activity, in terms of employment and value added and all other indicators. Then you see the big jump up to 1860 and a bigger jump up to 1913. So that first global century from 1800 to 1913 is the one when Arthur Lewis's characterization comes to pass, and that is the new economic order. Whereas you export the copra, I'll export the shirts. And these two kinds of economies go, as we say in economics, to the corners. They're totally specialized in these two activities, and with everything it implies. But notice this. Bingo! It turns around. There's a rise in, you know, the relative dominance of the European core, and then it turns around after 1913. That is, on average, Asia and Latin America are starting to catch up. It's not very dramatic, it's just the start, but as you're going to see, it continues in a big way. So the start of the catching up can be dated at least with 1913, long before the 1950s and ISI, import substitution strategies in the Philippines and all the rest. But notice it is not just that there is an industrial revolution taking place in the European core. There is, of course. The numbers there in that European core line double from 1800 to 1860, and then more than double to 1913. That's the Industrial Revolution doing its thing. But look what's happening there. De-industrialization. So their industries are being destroyed by global competition. But look what happened. Whoa. Oh, dear. Well, I got your attention, didn't I? Sorry about that, but I'm not going to walk over there. But note there's that turnaround in the periphery, including the Philippines, catching up. So it's those two episodes and what happens after 53 that I want to try to focus your attention on and see if we can see what all the countries within each of these big categories, to see who's doing really well, who's doing badly, who's lagging behind, who's just barely keeping pace, and who's catching up, and when, and why. I want to know about the whys. So that's the intent. Here's some more evidence. Just looking at one, I showed you this on the first lecture as well, just showing you one industry, but it's the most important manufacturing industry in every emerging industrial economy. So what share of their home market do local industries actually capture? And what share do foreigners capture with foreign imports? India starts with the first observation we can get, 1833, with only 5% of their domestic markets taken by foreigners, and that would be mainly the Brits. And 50 years later, as you can see, a huge share. Thank you very much. I'm terribly sorry. That India is losing its domestic market to foreign interests. And it happens quite dramatically. Ottomans exhibit the same behavior. It's even more dramatic. The first lecture I showed you evidence from Indonesia. You can multiply the examples, and they almost all look like that. But here's Mexico. The numbers are higher. The import penetration is higher early in the 19th century, and it gets higher. It goes from 15, or some midpoint, 15 to 40, but that final 40% penetration is a much smaller number than those other two countries. That is, Mexico is still undergoing de-industrialization. It's losing control of its home market. Domestic industry is having a hard time competing with foreign industry, but it's doing better than the rest. So why is that so?